Hey guys, my name is Chris. I'm a graduate student here at IU and also work at Career Services. Today I'm going to go over resume tips. Now, as a peer advisor for going on, this should be my second year now, I have done a lot of resume reviews and it's by far the trickiest thing here at Career Services just because resumes, they're personalized to each individual and they're really subjective depending on the recruiter. But today we're going to go over some baseline tips and hopefully that helps everyone out. And don't forget that you can always make an appointment at Career Services on Handshake to meet with a team member to review your resume in person. Hope you enjoy the video. Okay, and as I mentioned in the intro, today we're going to be going over general resume tips. This presentation is provided by Jody Tadlock and Julia Newman from faculty members at Career Services. In the future, I may also go over cover letters as well. So let's begin. So with a resume, there are four main required areas, and that is going to be the header, which in the contact information, and the education section, as well as the experience, and lastly, the technical section. Now, it does not have to be in this order, and we'll go over that later. There are also optional sections, and these optional sections include relevant projects or relevant coursework. You may have seen a bunch of resumes where people list out courses they've taken, such as databases or data structures and algorithms. You may also have student involvement or volunteer activities where you list clubs or places you volunteered at. You may also have a section particularly just for honors and awards. And lastly, if you've done any sort of publication, whether you're an undergrad student who did research or you're a math student or a PhD student who primarily does research, you may also have that. If you have a publication, it's highly recommended to do it. As far as projects and relevant coursework, this is more things I would suggest if you don't have enough stuff to fill up your resume, especially if you are going for your first internship. Projects can be very crucial for that. And these can be projects either you've done yourself or projects from your classworks, such as like final projects or capstones. Student involvement in activities, these things are always helpful as it shows that you are more than just a person behind a computer and that you can socialize. In tech, specifically with places like computer science or data science, a lot of recruiters find that a big problem is actually soft skills with applicants. A lot of people, there's not a lack of applicants with technical skills, but a lot of people lack communication abilities. So showing that you've been able to work in a club and work with other teammates, which is going to be a vital part of what you do on your day-to-day basis, that actually goes a long way. So don't ever neglect, don't think that, just because you joined a club that it's not worthy to go on your resume. It's always beneficial. And then of course, honors and awards, it's always good to show if you ever accomplished anything or you ever got an award or on the dean's list or whatever. It doesn't hurt. Obviously, there's others, if you can think of any, these are the core ones, but there's always other things you can put on there. But I would say these are the core ones. This section, this is some things you should exclude from resumes. Now, for international students, some people may be used to putting a photograph on their resume. This is not something you want to do at all. Not only does it open you up to discrimination, it also opens the company up to potential discrimination lawsuits. So it's best for everyone involved to not put a photograph on their resume. And of course, you can always link to your LinkedIn on your resume, and that will have a photo of you if you so choose to. Marital status, again, in the U.S., this is something that's not really common at all. Residency status. So this does exclude. This is touchy. If you are somebody that requires a visa, it may be worth noting on the resume potentially. Additionally, if you have a very foreign sounding name and you are a US citizen and you think that may actually detract from you getting applications, you could, but that's something that's up for you to decide. But in general, we have people exclude it because usually the default is that you are a US citizen, if not listed otherwise. But that's up for you to decide. Date of birth, obviously not something you should put on what's called, again, that's something that opens you up to age discrimination as well as open the company up to potential lawsuits. Social security number, you should never put a social security number on a resume. That leads to stuff like identity theft. Basically that's stuff that should only be given to employers once you actually start the onboarding process and filling out paperwork after you've already been offered a job. So, there are a lot of scams where they ask for that. Just watch out for that. National origin, again, this is something that is just opens you up to discrimination. No real purpose in putting it on there. Salary expectations. Again, this is something you want to discuss ideally face to face with a recruiter or whoever your hiring manager is. And it's not something that you should be discussing on the resume because it may, turn employers off. And then lastly, a reference list. This should not be listed on your resume. If an employer does, for whatever reason, ask for a reference, you can then provide that as a second document, but you should not fill up your resume with that information. Nextly, we have, we're going into the actual sections. So for header and contact information, the main core stuff you're going to want is your name, ideally your first and last name, your phone number, and an email address. This is all pretty straightforward. Tip for the email address is make sure it's appropriate. You may have an email address that you created when you were in middle school. That's, catlover@yahoo.com, right? But you should ideally make it professional. A good thing is always to do like first name, initial, middle initial, and then last name in full, and then at like gmail.com or something like that. But just make sure it's professional. Another thing, you could use your IU email address, but I would probably stay away from that just because at some point in the future you may lose access to it. So it's good just to have a an email address that you use for all professional bound things that's not tied to school. Another optional thing is an address. So we'll go into this further on, but if you want to, you can list the address, particularly just the city and the state, but that is an optional. If you do have a professional website, especially if you are in like UX, UI, or you do anything like that, having a professional website is always a good thing to show your portfolios. If you do have projects, it's a good thing to show. It's not really required, but if you have it, it's always a plus. There's a good chance recruiters aren't going to look at it initially, but if they are interested in you, that's when they would go and delve deeper and look at something like a professional website. And then, of course, links to LinkedIn and GitHub. I would say LinkedIn is the big one. Now, it is optional, but I would argue that it's almost required. So we're going to it later, but a resume is ideally going to be a one-page resume, unless there's very unique circumstances we will talk about later. And in this case, the LinkedIn allows you to show all your experience that you won't be able to fit into a one-page resume. It'll be able to allow you to show your club involvement, all your coursework if you choose to list so, all your work experience, and all your past education, publications. It basically will be a what we call a master resume that has everything. And then your resume itself will be a curated resume that's one page for that particular job. But LinkedIn, I think in today's day and age, if you're in the tech field, it is virtually required, and you might as well create one now and just start connecting with people from IU while you have a chance. And then GitHub, GitHub's helpful if you do have projects. Just make sure that when you do link a GitHub, that it's actually accessible to the public, and so that way, if a recruiter does end up going to your GitHub, they can actually view the projects. But again, a GitHub is another thing, kind of like the professional website, which the recruiters aren't going to look at right away, but if they are interested in you, that could give you the little edge at the end once they delve a little bit deeper.
So for this, we're going to go over a few example students. So we're going to have Miss Thompson and Mr. Gupta. Apologies if I mispronounced that. So we're going to look at Danielle's heading. So we'll see that down here, we have Danielle Thompson, we have current address, we have permanent address. And up here, we have a more simplified version. Now, as far as this goes, what I would recommend for this is we would get rid of the 91 West 3rd Street because, maybe in the 80s or 70s, people would send something to your house, but a recruiter is not going to send you a job application through the mail. So, having your city and state may be helpful, but anything beyond that, like you don't really need a zip code. It's just to give recruiters a general idea of where you're located. And again, if you're willing to move anywhere in the country, like if you're a new grad and you're willing to move anywhere in the country, I think that just having a location might actually hurt you more than anything, which is why I don't think it's required. But if you are looking for jobs in your state, putting Bloomington, Indiana might help if you're looking for jobs like near Indiana or near Indianapolis or near Fort Wayne or in Bloomington or something like that, if you're looking for in-person jobs. But in general, if you're willing to work remote or anywhere, I don't really necessarily think you need an address, but if you do, I would recommend only putting Bloomington, Indiana. And then we see that we have a phone number, which is perfect. We have a email address, which is perfect. This is a professional one. Obviously, this is the school email, which is fine, but
Ideally, you would eventually want to have your own professional email, as I mentioned before. And then ideally, we'd also have a LinkedIn right here. You could replace this with the LinkedIn. So similarly down here, we have current address and we have permanent address. So this is common, and I would typically recommend against this. There's a unique scenario where this might be helpful. If you're at IU and you are looking for jobs near Bloomington location, because that's where you live during school, it might be helpful to list Bloomington, Indiana, right? And then if you live in Kentucky, when you're not at school and you're looking for internships in Louisville area, that might also be helpful to put. But in general, if you're willing to take a job anywhere or you're looking for remote jobs, again, I don't think it's necessary. We'll see this user has her email address and her phone number here, but you'll notice between these two, this one takes up a lot more space. And when it comes down to a resume, when you want to stick to just one page, this space can make a big difference. So also, it's just kind of redundant. But in general, unless you hit that unique scenario, I probably wouldn't put a permanent address and a current address. And if you do want to put an address, I would just stick with just Bloomington, Indiana. You really don't even need a zip code. You definitely don't need your own personal address. Now, this is something that in the past we used to say was all right, but as time has gone forward over the past few years, we would recommend not putting address because it just opens you up to more scams and people sending you stuff in the mail if your resume gets posted online or you're applying a bunch of jobs. And I've never personally heard of anybody getting a job application through the mail that they haven't already been reached out to via email or in person on the phone. So it's just not necessary. It just opens you up to headaches. Okay, so now we're going to go on to Mr. Gupta's. And this is the perfect one right here from the very first line. So we have an email address. Again, ideally, at some point, you want to move to a professional one in case you get locked out of this, but not the end of the world. You have a phone number. You have a LinkedIn address. If you see, he has his customized LinkedIn URL. So if you go on your LinkedIn, you edit your profile, there'll be an option that says it's like edit URL, and it will let you change the URL. Because by default, this would be like a bunch of numbers before and then some letters, and it doesn't look clean. But if you set it directly to like your first last name or first name last initial, something like that, it looks way cleaner. And also, you would want to make sure this LinkedIn link actually works. So one thing that is a little bit unique is that LinkedIn.com is actually LinkedIn.com/in/ the username. So if you were to type in this exact URL, this wouldn't actually work. Um, it isn't the end of the world, especially if you have it hyperlinked on your resume, but it's something to note. Similarly on GitHub, I don't know the exact word pathing, but I'm assuming that could also be an issue. Okay, actually, I believe on GitHub you can actually, there is no other path. So I believe on GitHub this would work, but on LinkedIn you would actually need to go to linkedin.com/in/this username, and then that would actually pull. But if you type in just this exact URL and copy and paste it, you actually get a page not found error. And again, what we see here is we have the address. This is also fine too, but I'll get rid of just Bloomington. I'll just leave this Bloomington, Indiana. You have email address here, phone number, LinkedIn, and GitHub. Again, make sure your GitHub is accessible to all people. So if recruiter decides to look at it, it's fine. But this is the changes I'd make for this one. So as far as the education section goes, we have things to include. So we have school name, city, and state. This is helpful. So Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. We have graduation date, month and year. One thing you don't need to do is you don't need to put your graduation start date. This can open you up to if you have been at school and you took longer than the expected 4 years. Maybe you switched majors and you're there for 5 years. There's no reason to put that there. There's no reason. You're also going to want to put your major, your degree, your cognate if you have one, a minor if you have one. And as far as GPA goes, you're going to want to list your GPA, particularly if you have above a 3.0. The 3.0 mark is a lot of what companies used to filter out. So if you put below a 3.0 on your resume, there's a chance they may be filtered out. And in that case, you're better off just leaving it off. And if they ask you in the interview, you can explain to yourself why you have below a 3.0. Maybe you had other things come up. Maybe you're working as well. Maybe you're running a bunch of clubs. Whatever your reasoning is. As far as GPA, you have two GPAs. You have your cumulative GPA, which is all your classes, including your major and your gen eds. You also have your major GPA. I would personally pick whichever one is higher. If they're the exact same, I would go with cumulative GPA, but I would say cumulative GPA on your resume. If not, you can just put GPA. When you do put your GPA on your resume, make sure you know what it's out of. So you can do a 3.5 5.1 out of 4.00. So that way people know, because some international schools, are out of different scales. And then you want to list your honors if you have like on Dean's list. That is always helpful. Here is one example. So we have Bachelor's of Science in Informatics, December 2019. You can also put fall 2019. That's perfectly fine. Or you can do spring 2019 or summer 2019. We have Bachelor's of Science in Informatics. Do not want to put BS. You want to put Bachelor's of Science. You worked hard for the degree. Spell it all the way out. So here we have your cognate. If you have one, definitely list it. So we have cognate economics. We have minor German. If you want, you can also add another semicolon here. That's optional. It's really not going to make too much difference. We have Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. So you can either list Indiana University, Bloomington, and then also put Bloomington, Indiana, or you can just do Indiana University and then say it's in Bloomington, Indiana. It's really up to you. Here we have the GPA. It's a 3.4 out of 4.0. It has what it's out of. Here we don't know if it's a cumulative or major GPA, but we're just going to assume major. Really not the end of the world, but just a nice touch sometimes if you do have a cumulative GPA that's high. If you have a 3.9 GPA and it's cumulative, it's always good to just write the word cumulative right next to it, right before GPA, just so everyone knows that not only did you exceed well in your major grades, in your major classes, you also exceed well in your gen eds, which can show that you're good at like math and and English and the other classes you may have taken. And then here we have something unique about the student studied abroad at the university in Freiburg, Germany. And this is the dates. This is something where it's a little like pizzazz, right? It's something unique about you, something that other students won't necessarily have. And it's a small time where you can put something personal about yourself. So here we have another one. This is way more straightforward. This also works. So here we have Education, Indiana University. We have Bloomington, Indiana. We have the graduation date, May 2020. Again, you could do spring 2020. I personally put spring and fall or summer as the categories, but the month also works perfectly fine. We have Masters in Data Science, and then if you have because it's a master's degree, you're most likely not going to have a minor or anything, but if that, you would have that. And then here we have cumulative GPA. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier, where you actually list if you have a high cumulative GPA for this example. For the example, it's a 3.87, and that's a cumulative. You definitely want to put the fact that it's cumulative, because this is even more impressive than if it's just your own major grade. It means you took, school more serious as a whole and not just focus on your major classes. And then here we have, if you have a secondary education, such as your bachelor's degree, you want to list that as well. And then you can list your GPA again. It may be at a different scale, but like a 3.0 is what people usually think is the line. If you have something similar like that, you can list that under here. If not, that's 100% fine. Again, you don't need to put the start dates. As far as experience goes, your experience should be in reverse chronological order. So basically, your most recent job should be your first one, or your present job should be your first one, and then going back. You should have a variety of different, you can have a variety of different headings. It can be work experience, professional experience. You can just be the word experience. You should include placement employment, your title, your location, city, state, or country. And if you work remote, you can just put where the company is out of that you worked for. Dates of employment, including the month, year, or season. For the most part, this is actually where you would do months. So you'd be like May 2015 to August 2015 if you were doing an internship. And then you want to do 3 to 5 bulletin points to describe your experience. And the bulletin points are going to be the main thing that we will get into. So bulletin points are the most important part and the thing that most people struggle with a resume. And this is where you're really going to sell yourself, right? So you want to really write strong bulletin points. A key thing that people mess up with is the tense. So if you're currently employed, you want to use present tense, like develop applications instead of saying, but if you were previously worked there, you can say developed applications. There's task statements, this is the weakest, explaining what you did. Skill statements is even better, explaining how you did it, what your responsibility was, transfer skills, and accomplishment statements is best, explaining why you did what you did, the results and accomplishments. An example of a task statement would be brought food to customers. A skill statement would be provided friendly and efficient customer service in a fast-paced environment. How did you do it? You did it friendly and efficient, and you did it in a fast-paced environment. And the best would be you were recognized as an employee of the year for providing outstanding customer service to customers that resulted in an increase of returning patrons. So here, this is your accomplishment, recognized employee of the year. What did you do? You provided outstanding service, and what did that result in? An increase of returning patrons. So as an employer, you would find this intriguing. Here, this is something where you can actually quantify and qualify. So here we have responsible campers, planned and coordinated activities and fields for 30 children ages 6 to 12, right? If you just say plan and coordinated activities in field trips for children, right? You're losing out a bit, right? The fact that you plan for a large number of children, like there's a big difference between planning for 5 children and planning for 30. The fact that you were in charge of planning for ages 6 to 12 is most likely a lot harder thing to do than planning for ages, 14 to 16. So the other example is operate a cash register, provided prompt and friendly service to patrons, and average $1,000 in sales. So you're quantifying how much money $1,000 in sales and daily sales. So here we have the bulletin point format. And here we have beginning, worked with the restaurant's assistants to manage funds. And ideally what we want to do is we do action verb plus star method equals accomplishment. So star is situation, task, action, result. So worked with resident assistants in the hall, residence hall 300. Task to manage funds of resident hall. Action, you collaborated with resident assistants to manage budget. Result, you effectively managed a budget of $1,000. So your in bulletin point would be collaborated with a resident assistant to manage a budget of more than $1,000 for a resident hall of 300. And you could say 300 students or whatever, but this is fine. So here's an example of a bulletin point. So one thing we could do off the first bat is we want to put a space between here, and we want to most likely capitalize the word present. Other than that, this looks fine. Barista, we have Starbucks, Bloomington, Indiana. If you wanted to, you could also just put Bloomington, Indiana, and you could right align it underneath here and just have Starbucks on this side and Bloomington, Indiana right aligned. For the bulletin points, we have prepare and serve drinks and food in accordance with health code and cafe standards. Maintain a strong understanding of company values and customer needs, responding quickly to complex requests in a fast-paced environment, and process cash and credit transactions with the speed and accuracy of over 500 customers. So you will see that these are a little bit more advanced. We'll see that these have, with speed and accuracy, you have over 500 you're quantifying per shift. Mr. Gupta's experience, we have SBI Capital Market Leads. He's an information security engineer. Here we have June 2014 to June 2017. This is perfect. Again, so we have prototyped and piloted new systems and security concepts and enhancements to protect critical client data, designed, reviewed, and developed robust, stable, and manageable solutions while minimizing hardware and software downtime. Installed and maintained system software and third-party support software used by 25 company executives. So if you read this, you have a pretty decent idea of what Mr. Gupta did on his job. Now, ideally, if you could, it would also be nice to mention any tools, specific proprietary tools you use for this company. That's always a plus side, but he did quantify. If you see, he says design, reviewed, and deployed robust, stable, manageable solutions, and why minimizing hardware and software downtime. If you could actually quantify how much you minimize, like if you minimize downtime by 30%, that would always be extremely nice. Anything you can quantify is always extremely helpful. But that is a skill, and it's extremely hard to do, especially without just making up numbers, which is something I would suggest against. If you do put numbers that you quantify, make sure you can actually back them up somehow. Make sure you're not just pulling the numbers out of thin air. So here we have a skills section. So one thing that should be included in your resume, especially if you are from Luddy, especially if you do computer science, data science, something like that, you should definitely have a skills section, and it should be tailored to your industry. So, and it should be in separate categories, and it can also include foreign languages, lab skills, and other areas of competence related to position. One thing you do want to avoid is with your skills section is not to put soft skills. Some people will have a skills section where they list like communication, leadership, stuff like that. That doesn't really mean anything. Saying that you have a skill in communication doesn't mean anything. That skill in communication should be shown through your bulletin points. If you have a skill in leadership, that should be shown through your bulletin points, such as you managed a team, or you are a manager, or something like that. You you were the club president. Something that shows you have leadership ability instead of just saying it. And again, like something like communication will come up in your interview and showing how well you can actually communicate one-on-one during your interview. So stay away from putting soft skills into your resume. So here we have platforms. We have Windows, Mac OS. We have programming languages. We have Python, Java, Scheme. We have web development, HTML, CSS. Now
this isn't, depending on who your recruiter is, this could be a big deal. Some people will put HTML and CSS as programming languages. Technically, they're not programming languages. Some people will have a big deal with this. Some recruiters will, some won't. So if you do have room, it's always good to put your web development skills, such as HTML, CSS, on a separate line. You could also include that with stuff like PHP, JavaScript, even though those aren't solely for web development. We have miscellaneous, so we have Microsoft Suite and Adobe Photoshop. Again, once you get more skills, this is something you'd want to get rid of and replace with actual skills. Unless you're going into like UI UX, Photoshop doesn't really matter too much. But Microsoft Office Suite, for the most part, everyone knows how to use Word and Excel. So this is something good if you're looking for your first internship. But if you have other actual skills, like Jira, Docker, stuff like that, Azure DevOps, other potential softwares that might be helpful, Salesforce, stuff like that. As far as world languages go, this is helpful. One thing I would recommend is, so you have English native, you have German proficient, and you have Dutch beginner. As far as listing beginner languages, this is more, I would never put, if you only spoke English native and you were beginner in Dutch, I wouldn't even have a world language section. But because you are proficient in German, that is fine to do. But I would never put a beginner language that isn't actually going to be like you can actually contribute anything to the company with. But because you are proficient with German, this is fine. You could leave Dutch, you cannot. This is just showing that by adding Dutch as like the third language, it just shows that you're interested in learning languages and that you're constantly learning new things, which is fine. But I would never just put English and then a language that you can only speak a few sentences in, right? And as far as you can say proficient, you can say business level, you can say fluent if you reach to a near native level. That's really up to you. But I think the three main ones are going to be proficient, business level. You can say business, and then also you can put fluent if you are near a native level. One thing to know for world languages and for everything essentially you put on your resume, especially with world languages, expect for them to call you out on it, right? If you say that you have a business level fluency in Spanish, be prepared to have a conversation in there. Be prepared to be able to read something in Spanish or translate something. That's important. And if you say that you are knowledgeable in a programming language such as Python or Scheme, be sure that you know some stuff about the programming language and that you can answer a question in it. So here we have a way more technical resume, and this is from Gupta, and this is he's a master's student, so it makes sense that he has way more actual technical skills that he has. So we have database tools, we have Tableau, Hadoop, SAS, Hive, Raw. We have databases, we have MongoDB, MySQL, Microsoft Access, Oracle. We have languages, Java, SQL, R, Python, C, C++. Different languages, but it's fine to do the / Perl. We have platforms. We have Microsoft Windows, Mac OS, and Linux, Unix. Again, this is something if you're running out of space, getting rid of platforms is one of the options you can do to save space. Because if you know all three, Microsoft, Windows, Mac, almost everyone knows these two. The only one that's kind of unique is Unix. But if you've been in the tech world long enough, you most likely have had to interact with Unix and have a basic understanding of Linux. And then finally down here we have web development. So we have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery. You could have things like React in here and other frameworks such as that. So this is a beautiful technical skill section. Now, additional sections, we can have coursework and projects, student leadership, volunteer activities, organization clubs. We can also have publications. All those things are extremely helpful, especially if you have publications. If you've ever published a paper, please put that on your resume, or at the very least have it on your LinkedIn. That is something that definitely will set you apart from your peers, unless you're a PhD student. But if you're an undergrad student or a master's student and you have a publication, it's a pretty big deal. Even if it's not exactly related to, as long as it's in like STEM, I would list it. So here we have Danielle's additional section, Ms. Thompson's. So we have Accenture case competition, and we have collaborated with a team of 3 to provide a 35-minute presentation of CRM model, worked 12 hours and 2 days conducting research to present to a specific business solution. Ideally, a little bit more information on this could be helpful. I mean, this is fine as a beginning, but if you could maybe give a little bit more information about what exactly business solution you were providing. But overall, this is relatively solid. So here we have academic projects. So you can either put projects or academic projects. If these are all just taken from stuff you've done in class,
that's fine to do. So we have created a dynamic bus routing system to optimize camp bus routes, whether based on weather, traffic patterns, case schedules, class schedules using MongoDB, MySQL, and HTML. See, this is one thing I really like is the person actually lists out in this example of what technology they use. That's extremely helpful. If you want to go one step above this, you could actually link to a GitHub so people can actually view the code of it and see it, see how it was written and get an idea of your coding style. Another one is collaborating with group members to develop an online social network where users can create a profile, add friends, and interact with others using MySQL and JSP, spring 2017, and establish a ranking algorithm set for 1,000 web pages using Java and Hadoop, fall 2016. So this is all pretty standard stuff, and especially as far as academic projects go, these again are one of the things you would, once you start getting more actual work experience, these are probably things you would take off in lieu of actual work experience. But until then, these are definitely way better than like volunteer type stuff. If it's something tangible that shows your technical assets. Okay, the key points, the do's. So you always want to tell the truth, right? That's the main thing. Be prepared. Whatever you put on your resume, you may be asked about. So tell the truth. You want to make sure you have a clean format, easy to read and scan. If you notice, there are some more artistic resumes out there, and the only people I'd ever recommend doing those, if you are a UI UX person, I think that's fine for you because that's when you can show a little bit of your pizzazz. You can show a little bit of your artistic ability. But for almost everyone else, I would not. I would do the traditional resume style you see, where it's black and white and it's very straightforward, clear cut sections. And this is because I can't remember the exact time, but I'll put it on the screen. But I believe people that read your resumes on average only spend 6 to 7 seconds, and you want them to be able to see extremely fast what they should be interested in about you, like your education, your technical skills, your experience. They should be able to see it really quick. And because these people may be going through tens or even hundreds or potentially thousands of job applications over a period of time, and you need to be able to make sure you can get your point across extremely quick within that time period. We want to stress results, skills, and accomplishments, not duty performed. So ideally quantify. We want to use correct tense and action verbs. We want to laser print on quality paper. This is something that was a bigger deal in the past. If you're handing out your paper in person, you want to make sure it's a quality paper. They even sell resume paper. This was a bigger thing in the past when online resumes weren't such a big deal, but it's something to keep in mind. You want to keep font size between 10 and 12 and margins between a half inch and 1 inch around the entire document. Again, this is because you want to keep it down to one page, and the more space you have, the better. You want to upload resume as a PDF. You always want to have your resume in a PDF format, never a docs format. And we want to ideally title the PDF your first and last name, along with, you can do first name, last name, resume, and you can do that all like camel case or something like that if you know what camel case is. Another thing that I didn't point out and easy to read and scan, a lot of these times resumes nowadays are being filtered out with something called an AST thing. And that's where they kind of just scan your resume for keywords and filter out based on that. So you want to make sure that your resume is scannable, which is why we recommend you stay away from those more artistic resumes. And again, this is just because if you look at job applications, especially on LinkedIn and stuff, their companies are getting hundreds of applications, and they just need ways to filter things out. What not to do? We don't want to include personal information. Again, personal information is something where you could put on your like an about me section on your professional webpage, but that's not where you want to put on your resume, right? It just opens you up for a recruiter. One, it takes up valuable space that you can use to sell yourself, and two, a recruiter may not like your particular hobbies or something like that. If you put like some people used to put a hobby section. You put hobby like heavy metal music or something. A recruiter may hate heavy metal music and may just move on because of that. So don't put anything that can sell yourself short. Just making sure it's all valuable stuff that's not personable. Absolutely no misspellings, grammatical errors. This is something that is pretty obvious, but it's more common than you would expect. So make sure you look over it. Make sure you have a friend or a parent look over it as well. Feel free to go to Handshake on IU Handshake and make an appointment for a career services team member to look at it. No second page unless it's a full second page. In general, there should be no second page at all. The only use case in which you should have a second page is if you have more than 10 years of experience or you have a PhD, which is probably not going to be anyone watching this video. But if you do, let's say you've worked in the industry for 15 years and you're coming back and getting an MBA, in that case, you can get to a second page because you earned it, right? You have so much valuable experience it matters. But for the most part, you ideally never need one. And especially now that LinkedIn has come out, your LinkedIn is your second page of your resume, right? Your LinkedIn will have everything that you could ever want, all your experiences, all your technical skills, everything that you can't fit into a one-page resume. And then additionally, like I said, if you're a PhD student, maybe if you have a bunch of publications and your stuff like that, and you're applying to research labs and stuff. Again, there's a difference between a resume and a CV. So if you're doing a more CV academic style for research labs, that's different. But in general, unless you have over 10 years of experience or you have a PhD, I wouldn't go over to a second page. Even then, I'd be very careful. And again, I would make sure you can fit a full second page. Ideally, you want to avoid as much abbreviations and slang and jargon as possible. You may have to use some, but there's a good chance your HR/recruiter may not be technical and have a technical knowledge. So you want to make sure that anybody who may be reading that has a full understanding. As far as resume templates go, they're a good place to start, but ideally you want to create your own resume. You can look at different resume templates to get a good idea, but you kind of want to stay away from that because recruiters have seen every resume template ever. So it's very obvious on first glance to see if you use a resume template. And lastly, you want to avoid high school experience. Now, if you're a freshman or a sophomore looking for your first internship, it's not a bad thing to put on, but it should also be one of the very first things to go. In fact, it's the very first thing to go. Okay, so before we go, I just wanted to remind students that we do have something called the Career Search Guide, and this will be extremely helpful when you're creating a resume or a cover letter. So if we look here, they have a giant resume section. They also have other sections around handshake, self-assessment, social media, LinkedIn, job fair, career fair, stuff like that, job internship, career fair. But the main thing would be pages 15 to 31. This will be extremely vital. It's way more in depth than what I just went over and has a lot of the same information. I would deeply look into this. It has way more format and stuff like that. And the main things that I find extremely helpful, it gives the bulletin points, action verb, and this will actually give way better examples than what we have on the present point. For example, the action verb skill due to competence developed at a company A's first website using Java HTML generating approximately 1,000 potential customer hits weekly. I see we have wonderful technical skills sections here. We have a sample list of action verbs. We have resume do's and don'ts. And then here we have resumes. And these are perfect examples. So this is, you kind of get a general idea of what these resumes should look like. And these are all in perfect examples to look at. And this is one of the examples I wanted to point out. This is what I'm talking about. This is a UX UI researcher. This is the one time where you can kind of get a little bit more artistic with your resume. But in general, you kind of want to stick with these similar format looking resumes. So if we look here at a simple resume briefly, we'll see here that you have the education, work experience, and technical skills. Now, these things can be interchangeable in which order they go in. If you're still in college, feel free to put education. If you don't have much work experience, put technical skills next. If you've been out of college for a while or a few years, you definitely want to put your work experience first, and then technical skills, and then education. But if you're still in college, these things are interchangeable. So feel free to put that in whatever order you want. But definitely, if you've been out of college for a few years, put your work experience first, then technical skills, then education. And always, no matter what, whether you're in college or out of college, always put your student involvements, publications, volunteer experience, all that stuff should be at the very end of the resume. Because that's, again, like I said, a recruiter will only look at your resume for somewhere between 6 and 10 seconds. I'll try to put the statistic on the screen if I remember. And that is very brief time. So there's a chance they may not already make it until all the way to the bottom unless they find something interesting in your resume to keep them engaged. So we'll see this is all similar type of looking resumes. And again, this is a wonderful resource. This is called the Career Search Guide. You can find this on the Luddy/Career. This is the Career Services webpage. You can also go to Luddy and go to the Career Service desk and get an in-person copy yourself. And this gets updated every year or every other year, typically every year. So it's always ready to go and has the most beneficial information you can have from everything you could ever need from Career Services. And this is always a good starting point, whether you're doing a cover letter, resume, anything. And then lastly, always remember that you can make an appointment on Handshake to see a Career Services faculty member or peer advisor, and they can go over your resume or cover letter in person and provide useful information. That is it. Thank you guys for watching the video. My name is Chris Page. I'm from Career Services, and hopefully you guys learned something.